Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I am Francisco Capellá, Paco Capellá from Instituto Juan de Mariana, and we are today in this event at Universidad Francisco Marroquín with Bryan Caplan. Bryan Caplan is a very good friend of the Institute, and he has been doing some things with us in previous years. Bryan, hello.
Hello.
Bryan.
Hello, Madrid. Hola.
Bryan is not only a great libertarian and a great, brilliant academic, he's a very good person. He's a very nice person. I mean, you have to know him and you have to read him. He wants to make friends. So if you want to be his friend, I'm sure he's open, right?
Of course.
Bryan, you are from California?
That's correct.
You studied in Berkeley?
UC Berkeley.
A bit lefty, right?
UC Berkeley economics, I would say, is actually just a normal economics department in the US. It's not especially left-wing. It's more the people of the city of Berkeley that are left-wing, actually. The faculty is left-wing in the same way that almost all top schools in America are, but it's not that every department is special there.
But wasn't it the center of leftist progressive movements?
It was, but again, that's much more the people who actually live in the city, and it attracts people like that. I mean, probably like, meaning you might say, well, what about this like sociology department or anthropology department? And I'd say, well, they're super leftist, but that is normal for them. So to say that a school is leftist, I think you'd have to say it's more leftist than others. And I mean, Berkeley's probably a little bit, but the stereotype is actually very overstated. Definitely the economists at UC Berkeley just thought of themselves as regular economists. There were no Marxist economists or heterodox ones that I knew of who were actually in the department.
Then you went to the other coast, to Princeton, for your doctorate.
That is right.
What was it about? With whom were you?
So Princeton, again, is just like a very mainstream place. It was part of the five-way tie for top-ranked schools. I went there because it was the best school that gave me money. There was no other reason to go there. I basically, so you know about my work on signaling, and definitely going to Princeton was very much signaling for me. I was going there to get the estampa on my forehead. So Princeton, estampa. Right, so I was there to get the stamp. In terms of actually learning about economics, what I learned there is mostly just self-taught. Got through the coursework. It was very very mathematical with very low curiosity about the real world. The best faculty I had there. So I got to be a student of Ben Bernanke before he was Federal Reserve Chairman. And whatever you think about him as Federal Reserve Chairman, he is a really good economic historian. He knows a lot of facts. He actually cares about the real world, whereas a lot of the faculty at Princeton just did not care about the real world at all, and maybe just didn't know any facts, actually. And then, so like when I say, but other than him, the professors were just not very good teachers. I was also a student of David Card, who was my first semester PhD micro teacher, and I don't know, I'll just say this in public. David Card, perhaps if you're listening, you will reform. That he was an unbelievably bad teacher. He would just copy his notes. It was almost like a silent movie. He would just copy the math on the board and then almost point at it, ask him a question about what it means, and he just whatever. So he's won a Nobel Prize later on, but so I didn't find him to be a very good teacher anyway. I did my PhD under Ann Case, who is best known as being the co-author and wife of Nobel Prize winner Angus Deaton. But I would say I was not really close to her. I just found someone that would go and supervise my dissertation and let me finish in 4 years, which I did, because I wanted to actually start doing what I wanted to do. So that's my formal education, but I would say probably even more than most people, it's what I was teaching myself that actually had a big influence, and the other stuff I would just do what I had to do to get through, but it wasn't what I was interested in doing.
What was your dissertation about?
So it was called Four Essays on the Economics of Government Behavior. Basically, there are 3 papers on public choice of state and local government, and then I also had a macro paper on the macroeconomics of war. So let's see. I had one paper on the Tibu model. I had a theory paper, an empirical paper on basically racing power maximizing governments versus ideological governments. And then I had another one on looking at wars where during wars you normally have very expansionary monetary and fiscal policy, and I was trying to get some idea about what's going on with demand shocks to the macroeconomy through that paper. If you go and take a look at like my first 4 papers that get published, other than the Austrian one, those are 4 papers that are just my dissertation. And after I published those, then I never wanted to do that again, honestly. I thought, but what I'd say about my dissertation, that the kind of papers where they were written by someone else, and I was reading the journal, I'd look at the abstract and say, all right, that sounds kind of interesting, and I'd flip the pages and then move on. I wouldn't actually read them. Whereas the stuff that I've done since is the stuff that I really care about.
And right after Princeton, did you go to George Mason directly?
That's right. Yeah, so I am on track to become the longest serving professor in the history of George Mason University. I started at 26, and as an economist, I'm guaranteed to live to at least 100, and I'm never going to retire. So I don't think anyone else has served 74 years, so minimum, I will eventually be the longest serving professor there.
Who hired you, Tyler Cowen?
Officially, it's the department that hires. It's a work. So, just to understand, so in the United States, academic departments are worker collectives. They are worker collectives, and it is, since they are nonprofits, the worker collectives, they are hiring for some combination of how much will you raise my prestige and how much do I like you. Right, and so that is the usual system. It is still almost the system that is in place. As a result of DI policies, there are a couple of universities in America, including James Madison University in Virginia, not mine, but a different one, where they have taken away hiring authority from the academic departments. And instead, it is the administrators that make the final decision. But still, the normal system is it's a worker collective. They consider some candidates, and they vote on which fellow worker they like the most. But Tyler was the one who heavily pushed for me. So I think he was a very influential voice. My job market talk, I did a very bad job. And a lot of people said they should hire one of my competitors, but Tyler said, look, trust me, Bryan just had a bad day. And we should still hire him, and that was good enough. So I was able to get that job. So I definitely credit Tyler, but it was a vote of the whole department.
The place is impressive, and Tyler has good talent for talent. Tyler Cowen, Alex Tabarrok, Robin Hanson, Gareth Jones, Pete Butke, Pete Leeson, Christopher Coyne, Virgil Storr. It's not only Tyler's department, but the other ones. Larry White, George Selgin, Daniel Klein, Arnold Kling, Don Boudreau, Russell Roberts, Walter Williams, Vernon Smith, Rosolino Candela, Michael Clemens, Vincent Geloso, Mark Koyama, Richard Wagner, Bruce Yandel, David Levy, and already deceased James Buchanan, Gordon Tallock, Don Lavoie. So, I mean, it must be impressive.
Yeah, I mean, Don's been dead for.
Sorry?
Don has been dead for.
Yeah. I mean, the last ones.
Yeah. So I thought, oh, you did say James Buchanan. For a second. Yes, yes. It's been a great privilege to get to be on this incredible faculty. Most of the people that are of my age and younger, Tyler at least was very involved in their hiring. So it was around the time that I showed up that Tyler first became very involved in talent acquisition and just trying to recruit people, and also, of course, fundraising. But the history of the department goes back quite a bit more there. I think someone was just asking me, how did Walter Williams wind up coming to the department? So there's Karen Vaughn, and there was another older professor named Howard Block, and Walter was looking for a new place. And once they had those three there, then when James Buchanan was looking for a new school because he was mad at Virginia Tech, then they were able to get donors together with the initial core of the department to get Buchanan's entire group to move to George Mason, and that was like 6 or 7 people all together.
First I knew about you, not you personally, was about anarchism. You had an anarchism FAQ or something like that?
That's right, yes.
And you spoke about the anarchists in Spain, in Catalonia, in the Civil War.
That's right.
That was one of your interests back then?
So definitely very interested in anarcho-capitalism from high school. Whenever people ask me, wait, are you an anarchist, Bryan? I say, well, yes, but not the crazy kind. Not, like the normal, sane kind. Look, I'm not a fool. I don't think that if you just press a button and disband the police that everything's going to be great. I did, I think it was my first public debate on anarcho-capitalism against Yoram Brook for the, no, it's not. What is it? Anyway, so it's Gene Epstein's group. So that's the one where I'm able to explain exactly my position on this, and I was very happy with how I presented it. But yeah, so when I was in graduate school, I took advantage of the internet to write a frequently asked questions piece on anarchism. In those days, there's something called Usenet. And whenever people say, like, oh, X is a sewer now, you don't know sewers. Usenet, now that was a sewer. All right? Right? It was just tons of spam and horrible stuff and just getting posted in every group, but still, it was the first place where you could go and publicly debate your ideas without having any credentials. Just get on there and start replying and writing things. There was, in those days, there was already a lot of argument between the traditional left-wing anarchists and then anarcho-capitalists. And normally the left-wing anarchists would just say, you aren't even anarchists, get out of our group, we can't stand you, go away. But the anarcho-capitalists would keep thinking, like, they say they're anarchists, but we have to, like, once they understand that the only way that anarchy can work is with free markets, then they'll convert to free markets. And no, I never actually saw that happen. But yes, so I wrote that just to go and for an outsider to explain what even are these debates about. And then one of the main things that people would argue about on those groups was the Spanish Civil War and how anarchism actually worked in Spain. And for that, I just went and read all of the main English language works on the Spanish Civil War, and especially the ones relating to Spanish anarchism. And that's where I really learned a lot, because it's one thing to say that in the real world the only alternative to government is markets. But what's very interesting about anarchism in the Spanish Civil War is a bunch of people who hated markets still discovered this harsh reality. Because what happened in the cities of anarchist-controlled Spain is that the members of the unions actually listened to the propaganda about workers will take over the factories. And each group of workers took over whatever workplace they were at. And then there were the intellectuals saying, no, workers take over the factories means that we collectively take over all the factories. It doesn't mean that each group of workers gets to run a factory. What, are you crazy? But generally the workers said, no, it means exactly what we think it means. It means that we people that work in the Barcelona Opera now run the opera. And that is what happened in the cities. And in the cities, because their main base was the unions, they really didn't have any alternative but to tolerate the ownership of all these businesses basically remaining private, but switching from the original capitalist owners to these worker cooperatives, but ones where the workers actually did in fact own the means of production. And then what was fascinating was reading historians just describing the facts. These are not economists who have a theory about what has to happen. These are historians who describe what really did happen. Some of the main things you saw happen is some workers got to take over factories where there's a very high value of capital per worker, and those workers were suddenly rich. And then the question is, what do we do about hiring new workers? And they generally created a two-tier system. Right? What's a good translation of two-tier system?
Dos partes, dos
partes, where it's only the original workers who get to have a share of the capital. The new workers are just regular employees and they don't get a share. Right? And when someone says, that's not fair, it's like, well, if you say that we have to share our capital with them, then we just won't hire any new workers. And this is during a war, like, we need to increase production here. And like, well, I guess you're going to have to compromise your principles then. And then meanwhile, there's also very strong documentation about what happened in the agricultural areas of anarchist Spain, which is they created Stalinist collective farms where you were shot if you tried to keep your own land. Right? And with the slightest veneer of voluntarism, namely a bunch of anarchist militia shows up from the city in a village, and then they first go and murder the biggest landowners, and then they very close to said, so would everyone here like to voluntarily join a collective farm now? It is the only way consistent with the principles of the anarcho-socialism. And it's like everyone raise your hand if you don't want to be part of a collective farm. And like, okay, we're all in. And again, you can go and read the history where it's very standard to take all money away. So then if you want to leave, how can you get away? Right? Shooting people for trying to leave. And this was a time actually when the actual Spanish Stalinists were saying, no, wait until after total victory to steal the peasants' land and turn them into slaves. Don't do it during the revolution, they won't like it. Wait until you have the upper hand. So in that paper, The Anarcho-Status of Spain, I said, look, it really did show in the cities you had capitalist anarchy, And in the country, you had socialist statism, and those are really the only alternatives that you've got. So yeah, that was a very fun paper. And there was a time where, again, I still don't speak good Spanish, as you can tell. Intento hablar español, pero soy malo. But yeah, but still, in a way, one of my personal favorite papers.
You have a web page. I think it's bryancaplan.com or
bkaplan.com.
bkaplan.com.
That's right.
And these articles are available there?
Yes. So I got a full archive of everything. If you didn't find something, that it's probably under early writings.
One of your early writings, which caused much debate here, is why you are not an Austrian economist. Because here a lot of people are Austrian. I used to be Austrian. I am less Austrian now. Why are you not?
Right. Great question. So first of all, this is an article that I write from a place of love. It's not when I'm not angry at Austrians. People generally assume that if I change my mind, it's because a person made me mad. I'm like, no, I don't change my mind because people make me mad.
Sorry, you mean you changed your mind? So before you considered yourself an Austrian?
So yeah, absolutely. So when I was 18, I was a absolute diehard Misesian Rothbardian. That's what I thought going into college. So I got to meet Murray Rothbard the summer before I started college. I read Human Action in high school, Man, Economy, and State. I read everything Rothbard had written. I asked my parents to buy me The Theory of Money and Credit for Christmas of 1988. and I did read it. So all of that work, I got a lot out of it. I enjoyed it, and that was what I really believed. But over the next year, in later years, I just learned a lot more economics and also learned more philosophy. And a lot of it was just like, well, there's more economics, more going on, and there's things that are not consistent with what Austrians are saying. And I decided that the more mainstream view was right. Let's see, but there was something else I was going to say. Also a lot of what distinguishes Austrian economists from regular economists is the philosophy. And that's where I actually said, no, there's something wrong with the philosophy. So like if you know Rothbard's doctrine of demonstrator preferences, which is you cannot say that you have any preference that you don't express in action. It's like, sounds plausible, but it's like, but what about right now I have a preference for ice cream. If you could give me like a really good coconut gelato right now, I would definitely eat it. I have a preference for this ice cream, but I'm not doing anything about it because it's not convenient. But the preference is here in my mind or in my heart. So yes, I was very Austrian until I was about 19, and then I learned more and just changed my mind. Again, like in terms of like what are the really big disagreements? Let's see. Again, probably the biggest one ultimately is there is this hard Rothbardian line on externalities and public goods don't exist, which is one where like that's just nonsense, right? It's like, so if there were an asteroid coming towards Earth, and it would take $1 trillion of voluntary donations to deflect it, and you were only able to raise $500 billion, that would show that people would rather be destroyed by an asteroid than give up the money. It doesn't seem like a very convincing argument. Now you may say, look, but aren't there all kinds of private ways to deal with public goods, and doesn't government abuse it? Yes, of course. One of the main themes of the book that I'm writing right now is that no government on earth follows the economics textbooks and the recommendation for what to do about externalities, public goods, and public bads. There is this Austrian view that the textbook is a rationalization for the status quo. It's like, no, the status quo is much worse than what textbooks say. Much worse. Like, what do I mean by that? Well, so what do textbooks say to do about negative externalities? What do textbooks say to do about air pollution, for example? Do they say write a phone book of regulations and then make everybody follow them? No, that is not what the textbooks say. What the textbooks say is impose a tax per unit of pollution and then let everyone pollute as much as they want. That is what textbooks say. There is furthermore an argument. This is how you get any given level of pollution reduction at minimum cost, because if you have a $10 per ton tax, then who cuts back on their pollution? Everyone who can reduce their pollution at a cost of less than $10 per ton. Who continues to pollute? Everyone that would cost them more than $10 per ton. There is no government on earth that just has taxes on negative externalities and say, now, once you pay the tax, do whatever you want, which would be a huge improvement, actually, over the status quo. If you just think about all of the crazy regulations that you have to deal with for energy, for cars, for pollution, for recycling, and imagine how much easier it would be just to have a tax and you pay it and do whatever you want. So one of the main themes of my book, I also have a blog post on this, but I say, look, the textbook theory of market failure is a massive approach to government because no government actually listens to the textbook. So anyway, this Austrian view of externalities in public goods and public bads are just a myth, some kind of conceptual confusion. That's the main difference, I would say. I also say that I really like the part of Rothbard's Introduction to Theory and History where he said, what's good about Austrians is that we're not behaviorists. We don't just look at observed behavior. We think about what's going on in terms of mental states. And I'm like, yeah, that's a really good idea, which means Austrians should be much more into psychology. The idea that behavioral economics is something that Austrians shouldn't like, it's it's actually something that some mainstream people might have a philosophical objection to, where they say, look, all we know is observable behavior, like B.F. Skinner. But if you really take psychology seriously, I would think you'd want to say, well, how about we read some psychology? How about we examine it? And you can see this in things like Austrian business cycle theory, where for the theory to make any sense at all, you need a psychological premise, which is that people overestimate the durability of low interest rates. Without that assumption, the model does not work at all. And yet, Austrians, as far as I know, have shown no curiosity into investigating, is it true that people overestimate the durability of low interest rates?
When you said that there are different branches of Austrians, there are the more Misesian ones, the ones at the Mises Institute, who are very, we call them here, Talibans of praxeology, that they are only interested in formal things and generalities, and taxation is safe, and the state is evil, and you have to hate the state. And there are other people like Pete Böttke, the Austrian, the main Austrian at George Mason, with whom you had a debate, which probably is available on YouTube somewhere. And they are I would say, more reasonable.
So my view is, in a sense, I think the Misesian ones are more reasonable. Namely, they've got a body of doctrine and a body of official arguments, and they say very specific things. So it's not that the Misesians just say, we just want to talk about philosophy. No, they have things like Rothbard saying, look, theorem, no tax can be shifted forward. There is no such thing as a tax being borne by suppliers. Right? It's that's weird. But anyway, so that is a very specific doctrine. It's one that you can argue with. And honestly, that's the kind of thing that I like, is someone that has a bunch of very specific positions combined with arguments. And then you can say, look, I disagree with step 3 in the argument. Right? Or, again, if you read Man, Economy, and State, Rothbard has what he claims is a absolute proof, apodictic, that all supply curves must have a positive slope. Or as he says, you'll slope forward. And yet, if you go and read, I think, chapter 7 or 8, he strangely mentions backward bending supply curves. Right? If you're like, what the hell is that? It's like, well, suppose that you're a teenager and you want to earn 5,000 euros to get a car. That's all you care about. Can you imagine someone with that motive? I just want to earn enough money to buy a car. Seems like a motive that's believable, right? Well, guess what? If you accept that a person like that could exist, then what will they do if their wage doubles? They will have their labor, which would be an example of working less when the wage is higher, which contradicts chapter 1 of the book. I will say that Pete Böttke, I've already had this argument with him many times. That branch of Austrianism, to me, it's hard for me to deal with because it's very short on specific arguments and specific claims. It's more of a philosophy, right? And it's I think an economist should make specific claims and say specific things and give an argument for those specific things. Now, I'll say that there are some Austrian ideas that are good, but they're more of an inspiration or intuition. So, there's an Austrian idea, which again I would give more credit to Mises and Rothbard, which is that it is not true that perfect competition is better than oligopoly. Right? There is and it's one where it's a very sensible thing to say, and when they talk about economic history, it's very reasonable. It's also one where if you understand neoclassical economics well, and I think I do, It is not implied by neoclassical economics either. It is just a total misinterpretation of the models to say that neoclassical economics has some proof perfect competition is better than anything else. It's like, no, they don't have any proof like that. They have a proof that perfect competition is great if there are no economies of scale and a number of other conditions. And it's like, yeah, well, in industries with no economies of scale, then we basically have perfect competition. Why do you have a small number of large firms? Because of economies of scale. So this is one where Rothbard was very strong on this, of saying, look, whatever market structure you get is actually one that is well matched to the particular circumstances of that industry. And I would say this is one where, despite a lot of complaining about internet companies, Amazon is the best store that ever existed in all of human history. And it fits the textbook definition of a monopoly so well, and yet somehow it seems awesome. And it's like, well, how can that be? It's like, well, there's actually some more obscure neoclassical models explaining how a monopoly can be very competitive. It's like, yeah, there's the contestability model. It's like, yeah, well, if the monopolist is very worried about potential competition, then a monopoly can actually give you fantastic results. And Amazon is, I would say, the very best example, and it's not just a small example, right? It's an overwhelming example of how great a one industry that dominates a market can actually be. So there are a lot of general Austrian ideas that I think are good. I'd say that they're ones where, if you know regular economics, it is not hard to express them using normal economic language. And one of the main disservices that Austrians have done is sticking to their own jargon, sticking to their own particular words to minimize the actual influence of the ideas. And one that has particularly bothered me is there is a fairly large body of empirical work associated with economist John Halterwanger on the question, basically testing Schumpeter's creative destruction. So why do we get productivity increases in firms? Is it because individual firms learn and improve? Or is it because good firms survive and expand and bad firms shrink and die? And Halterwanger has exhaustive empirical evidence from millions of business showing that Schumpeter is very right and that selection is more important than improvement of individual firms. And there is one Austrian economist, Brian Albrecht, who does know this work and has talked about it, but the vast majority of Austrians just keep going and talking about what Hayek said or what Mises said or what Rothbard said, which is foolish.
Yeah, they tend to be too philosophical. Mm-hmm. They look a lot at the past. There's a lot of history of economic thought.
Yes.
They hate mathematics and empirical data.
Right.
And that impedes, that blocks their influence in the mainstream. You're breaking nuts. It turned to become a cult.
Yeah, my honest story here is, look, the actual value of mathematical economic theory is really low, and Austrians are right to think that it's a waste of time. It's something that you need to, intrinsically, it's something that to get your ideas across the profession you need to do. But if someone were to say, defend spending years learning math to be an economist, they'll say, yeah, I'm not going to defend that, right? And I've seen the inside of how the profession works. There is this ridiculous lie that economists tell is, well, we need the math in order to explain the English clearly. It's like, first of all, most people could never understand what you're saying when you do it mathematically, so that's definitely wrong for almost all audiences. It is not true that math is a better way of communication for 99.9% of humans. And then, what about the remaining 0.1%? I have found that most economic theorists are very bad at translating the model back into English. So they start with the normal common sense intuition, then they make a model, and then they try to translate it back into original English and mess it up. And they actually say things that are wrong. If you have never heard of this model, don't worry about it, but there's something called the efficiency wage model. And most economists who explain it are just misstating what the math says. It's like, yes, if you had stuck to English, you wouldn't be screwing this up. It's only because you did it in math that now you are capable of misstating it for your students. The mathematical theory I do think is basically just a giant waste of time, and it's massive signaling. The only argument I've heard that makes any sense is this is how we keep out the left-wing fanatics from economics. because they won't learn the math. This is how we protect economics from being sociology or anthropology or whatever. And it's like, look, there are better ways, man. There are better ways, right? But however, so on the other hand, so the statistics and econometrics, that's something where I think there is a lot of value in that. Yes, it can be very misused. Yes, there are a lot of really crummy papers involved using statistics, but the general idea that you can learn a lot about the world with a scrupulous application of statistical reasoning, I think that's totally true. And for someone to say that statistics is stupid, like, no, that is stupid to think that statistics is stupid. The only reasonable thing is it is being used poorly or misused, or people are pretending like they've actually answered an important question and they're really solving a different one. But still, I would say that just learning statistics has great intrinsic value in terms of getting a better understanding of the world. So I think there's Austrians who say yes, yes, but then they just don't do the statistics.
Okay, we've been talking for almost half an hour. We have half an hour, and we haven't reached your first book. I mean, everything you're telling is interesting.
Yeah.
But, so your first book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, Why Democracies Choose Bad Policies, which you are presenting tomorrow at 7 at Rafael del Pino. What does it mean? What are the four main ideas, the four myths?
Yes. All right, so I don't want to speak really fast because I want everyone to understand me. I'm probably already speaking too fast, actually. So the myth of the rational voter, it came from several sources. So first of all, I totally self-taught learned public choice. Public choice was not taught at Princeton, not taught at Berkeley. So self-taught, I learned public choice and political economy, learned about both the theory and the empirics, and realized, so this is a big part of the free market answer to what about a government that did exactly what the textbooks say? And it's like, yeah, the government isn't going to do exactly what the textbooks say. It's not going to do anything close to what the textbooks say. It's going to do what interest groups want. It's going to make a bunch of standard mistakes. But then I read a book by economist Donald Whitman called The Myth of Democratic Failure, where he pointed out just a lot of logical errors in standard public choice. And the really big one for me is he kept saying, unless voters are irrational, unless voters are estúpidos, los votantes son estúpidos, los votantes son estúpidos, unless that, then this model will not work. Like, for example, it's like, well, so standard view of public choice is, well, because the special interests have so much influence in government, we're always going to have tariffs, even though the public, despite the fact that they harm the public. And Donald Whitman said, look, if this was true, why don't voters just vote against any politician that ever votes for protectionism? It's not that hard. And especially like in a debate, why don't politicians compete to be the biggest free trader in every debate? If it's really true that these tariffs are just benefiting the protected industries and are harming the typical voter. And then Whitman said, the only way this could work is if you thought that voters were so irrational as to not understand that free trade is good for them. He did a very good job, and that was one where he said, okay, so now we need to change public choice. And what do we need to say? We have to say, los votantes son estúpidos. We need to say that. And so that was the inspiration, and really what I did in that book is try to say, look, not only theoretically do you need this, Whitman's right, but here is the overwhelming empirical evidence that it is true that voters have crazy views, and they are not just ignorant. It's not just that they don't know some facts. It's that they believe the opposite of the truth. The way that I like to think about it is that economic fallacies are like gravity. Unless you have a powerful engine to take you away from the earth, you will crash on the earth. Unless a normal human being has a great economic education and learns to think like an economist, they will just instinctively believe in protectionism, in socialism, in saving jobs, right? And thinking that the economy is doing poorly. So those four things I just mentioned are the four main economic biases that I talked about in The Myth of the Rational Voter. Yeah, the whole idea was to say, look, the ideas of public choice, the conclusions make sense, but they need a new foundation with new evidence. And then I tried to go and say, now what people in public choice should do is learn a lot about public opinion, learn a lot about political psychology, understand that rational voter models that people have been using are just so crazy, so far from the truth, that really we need to pretty much think the opposite.
We had Jason Brennan a couple of years ago with Against Democracy.
Yes.
Then the next book was more personal, selfish reasons
Yes.
to have more kids, why being a great parent is less work and more fun than you think. But it's interesting because it's going to be very fashionable and very important right now that the
Hopefully.
demographic collapse is becoming more obvious.
Yes. So this is the only thing I've written that I know has improved the world. Everything else I've done, it's not clear that anyone listened at all. Right? Even the case against education, which I guess we'll talk about in a minute.
Sure.
The U.S. does seem like they may be cutting education spending, but it's not because of me. It's totally unrelated. I just happen to recommend it. But Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, this is a book where I do have hundreds of people say they have had additional kids because of the book. And if you use the usual economist's measure of the value of life, it's usually we just say like $10 million. Where does that come from? Well, there's some story. But anyway, if we use that $10 million per life and multiply it by 500 kids, then that book created $5 billion worth of value. So it's like, all right, I didn't get the $5 billion, but still, like, I did something useful with my life. So this is a book where I'm trying to combine a few different fields. So economics, of course, but also behavioral genetics, which is it's an interdisciplinary field where they try to use twins and adoptees to understand or to finally answer in a reasonable way the classic nature versus nurture debate. Right? Because people have been arguing about nature versus nurture for thousands of years, but normally the debate is just like, well, I feel that it's really nature. Well, my opinion is that it's nurture. It's like, okay, right? Or like John Stuart Mill, what was his contribution? He just used a lot more words to say, I feel it's nature. he has like a 100-word sentence, which is like, to ascribe differences between people to innate differences is the most vulgar of all. All right, you don't know anything, John. Anyway, so here they actually use reasonable methods to get to empirically answer the question, easiest to understand for adoptees. Because if someone is adopted by a family and they resemble the family at a greater than chance result, then the natural inference is, okay, that looks like nurture with confidence. Right? So if you get adopted by Zoroastrians and you turn out to be a Zoroastrian, it's like, that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. And of course, there's a case where you can do statistics to get a large sample to separate luck from actually a systematic pattern. With twins, the method is a little bit less clear, but it takes advantage of the fact that there's two kinds of twins. So there are identical twins and there are fraternal twins. Identical twins share all of their genes, 100%. Fraternal twins share half their genes, just like normal siblings. And so we can see what happens when you get a bonus 50% genetic similarity. How much more similar are identical twins to each other than if they were just ordinary siblings. So anyway, I did not create this area of work. I haven't done any new twin adoption studies. But what I did see is, wait a second, if we take this work seriously, then it means that so just to back up, the main result out of twin adoption research is that the people saying, I feel nature is more important, are actually generally correct, with a few exceptions. And the people that are saying, I feel nurture is more important, those people are wrong, again, with a few exceptions. And especially in the long run. And now, there are important exceptions, so I've written a few pieces on international adoption from the third world to the first world. That is an environmental intervention so extreme that if you get adopted at birth from a third world orphanage and we measure your outcomes in adulthood, you have enormous gains. But within the first world, which is where almost all twin adoption studies are done, it really does not matter very much whether you grow up in a rich family or a poor family by first world standards. Right? So that is the big result out of this research. In Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, I first tried to get the most thorough review of all the research from a parent's point of view. Because other people, so there's an earlier book by Judith Harris called The Nurture Assumption, where she said, yes, parents don't have much effect on how kids turn out, upbringing that is. Genes have a lot, but she really focused on personality measures. And I think the obvious answer there is, well, what kind of an evil parent would try to change a child's personality? Do you have a child who's like, you know what personality you have? Right, that's a bad personality. I'm giving you a new personality. From now on, you will be this personality. Right, that is very unusual. So I think an easy answer to Judith Harris is parents don't have much influence on the things they are not trying to influence. What I try to do is get a list of things where parents are definitely trying to influence them. So health, intelligence, success, character, values, appreciation. So all these things where parents do want to change their kids' outcomes. And I show that even on these things too, there's very little evidence of long-run parental effects. For example, there's a great study of Korean orphans that got adopted by American families. The ones that were adopted by the very richest families had the same average income as the ones adopted by the very poorest families. And this study, the poorest families only had to have an income 25% above the poverty line. So there was almost the whole range of American incomes with no apparent effect upon the adult economic success of the children. Now, so all of these facts are there. And this is where I said, well, look, as an economist, this tells us something. It says, first of all, helicopter parenting. Do you call it helicopter parenting in Spain? Right, helicopter parenting is unscientific. When someone says, I have to do this to give my kid a good future, they are wrong. It is not just a matter of opinion. It's like, well, I feel that this is what I... No, wrong. Not true. What you feel does not give you the answers for what the actual causal effect of parenting on children is. Now, when my book came out, there was a mom who wrote a piece on what in my mind, I gave it the title, Soccer as Contraception, or Football as Contraception. So, Football as Contracepción. Is that es correcto?
Anticonceptivo.
Yes, yeah. Anticonceptivo?
Yes.
Anticonceptivo. Right? And what the mom said is, look, right now we have two kids, and they're both in soccer, which is what we call football, of course. And all the practices and the games take up all of our time. And then we were thinking, what if we have a third kid? And like, well, we'd like to, except then we'd have to have 3 sets of soccer practices and 3 sets of games. So we're not going to have another kid. And what I said is, okay, that's good economics if you are right. And you get like, well, why not just have a third kid and not do soccer? Like, that would be disaster. The kid would be a failure. He wouldn't get the discipline that only sports can instill. All right, and it's like, no, wrong. That is not true. And so I was saying, look, if you believe that because the cost of having a child is too high, or especially having a child of the quality you want is too high in terms of effort of the parents and money, if that was what's stopping you from having another child, then I have good news, which is it's just not true that you have to do those things to get a child of the quality that you want. So I said, step 1 is, if you're doing it, if you love taking your kids to soccer practice, great, then it's consumption. But if you're doing it as investment and you are suffering, and if your child's suffering too, then stop. It's a bad investment, right? And so that's step 1. And then step 2 is, once you reduce the cost of having kids, then you should reassess the optimal number. So that was the idea of the book. And it's, on the one hand, I don't believe it caused millions of new people to be born. That would really give me a lot of an incredible, that would be like $10 trillion worth of value. But like I said, it is the one where it did change a lot of people's minds. Tengo solamente 4 niños. So I did know about this research before I had kids, but my first 2 kids were identical twins, which probably was a major motivation for writing the book, because every day I would look at them and say, you are the kind of people... Wait, did my mic go out?
I don't know. Take this one?
Yeah, I guess it ran out.
I think yes. This one also, right? Well, the most important one is for the taping, for the recording.
Okay. So anyway, whenever I would look at my kids, I would say, you are the kind of people that people study to find out why people are the way people are. And that was an inspiration. And yes, my identical twins are really similar. Really. I've never known any 2 people that were as similar.
So what you're really saying is, don't worry so much.
Yes.
Enjoy the ride.
Yes, that's right. So I agree that I know many parents who are miserable. I know many parents who have allowed being a parent to make themselves miserable, but always say, look, that is not the children's fault. It is your fault. You are making bad decisions. often based upon a false theory about what your child needs in order to have a good life. So step 1, stop believing that wrong theory. Step 2, change the way that you parent to reflect that theory. And step 3, if there's still time, rethink the number of kids you want to have.
Also, I'm sure you know that there's recent research, Jonathan Haidt and other people are talking about social networks, the damage they're doing, but others are paying attention to over-parenting, pampering children, protecting them too much, not giving them independence, and that is causing harm because those kids are not mature. They cannot take responsibility, they cannot make decisions, they don't know how to lose.
Yes, I know Jonathan Haidt says that. I think that his work also contradicts previous work on twin and adoption research. I don't think that the evidence of children are doing really poorly is actually correct. I mean, there are a number of things that have changed, but to say this is just a general sign of children have been destroyed by overparenting is, I think, also grossly exaggerated. So things that have changed in the U.S. are things like the share of teenagers that have driver's licenses has fallen. I say, well, you can either say that overparenting has ruined them, or like, well, maybe it's because of ride-sharing apps and things like that that just make it a lot cheaper and more convenient to not learn how to drive. The most visible sign of young people being really miserable is there's been a rise in suicide rates, and I think in rise in teen suicide rates. But if you go and zoom out and look at all the data for as long as we have it, basically suicide in the United States was at a minimum around the year 2000. So it was high. It was higher in the past, fell, and then now has risen again. So it's like pretty odd to say it's got to be the internet. It's like, well, there's some years where the internet were still falling, and then it starts going up, but it was higher earlier. Let's see. So anyway, so generally still skeptical that Haidt is correct that helicopter parenting has actually harmed children. But the idea that it's harm for children in the long run, the idea that it has caused a lot of suffering at the moment, where parents are just not enjoying life because they're giving so much to their kids, and often the kids themselves are not very happy with it. So often kids don't like their activities that they are required to do to have a decent life.
Your next book was The Case Against Education, Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. And you're a teacher, you're an educator, and we are in an education institution. So
right. In terms of the hypocrisy, so what do you say here for whistleblower? You say whistleblower?
Chivato.
Chivato?
Soplon, chivato?
Yes. So look, if I was not a tenured professor, no one would take the book seriously. I had to be a tenured professor to write this book. But what I do in this book is I take an economic model that is very well known, which is the signaling model. There's even a Nobel Prize for it. Michael Spence got a Nobel Prize for his work on the signaling model of education. And then I say something that almost no other economist has said, which is, this is the best theory of actual education in the real world. There are like 5 Nobel laureates who've written papers related to the signaling model. Yet none of them has ever really taken seriously the idea of this might actually be the correct or the best or the main theory of what's going on in education. So I already mentioned las estampas. Las estampas. Necesitamos las estampas.
Sellos.
Yes.
Sellos. You say stamp in English? Sello. El sello.
Sello. Anyway, so the signaling model says, look, there's 2 possible reasons why education would raise your income. One is the standard one that you go and you build human capital, you acquire useful job skills, and then, of course, your productivity is higher as a result of the education, you make more money, and therefore education is not only good for the individual, but good for society. That's the normal view, which completely dominates empirical work in education economics and labor economics. The signaling model says, look, there's another explanation, another mechanism, and that is signaling certifies quality of work. It doesn't actually improve you. It is a way of demonstrating that you were good all along, and thereby your application is not thrown in the garbage. All right. Most evidence that people present for human capital is equally consistent with signaling. It's like, well, here's the 1,000th paper showing that more educated workers earn more money. Okay, maybe they earn more money because of the stamp on their forehead. Maybe that's why. It's like, well, why would they do that? Because it is too hard to go and give 500 job applicants a trial period on the job to find out who's the best one. Right? The normal thing you do is you are trying to reduce the number of people you're considering for a job to a reasonable number, and using educational credentials is a totally reasonable thing to do. It's like, well, how do you know that the best engineer in the world didn't fail out of college? Okay, well, I'm not absolutely sure, but it seems like a bad bet. I think a really good engineer would probably have done well in college, so I'm going to do that. So what I try to do in this book is to present, first of all, two things. First of all, to show why theoretical objections to the signaling model are, at best, only good objections to a very simplistic version of the model, and then to go over a lot of empirical evidence that signaling is just a much better story. Right? And so I guess we're short on time, so I'll say, the best evidence for the signaling model is just this. Most of what you learn in school is obviously useless in the real world. Obviously. American students have to spend 3 years studying foreign language in high school if they want to go to college. What do you think about Americans' foreign language proficiency? Yes.
All that Spanish for nothing.
Yes, all that Spanish. Yes, and it's not that they get good and they forget it either. They just, like, the standard's just extremely low, but you have to do it if you want to go to college. And if you fail it, then you will not go to college, and it will be very hard to get a good job. And that is how America works. You could also do French if you want, or Latin. You can do a dead language, right? That can prevent your success. It really can. All right. So it's like, if we have first of all, just look at how useless most of what people are learning actually is. And yet, it is also totally true that more educated people adjusting for anything that you want statistically do make more money. And not just engineers and physicists and economists, even people with degrees in anthropology and fine arts make more money adjusting for a long list of things than people that didn't go to college at all. All right, so how can there be so little learning of anything useful and yet so much earning? Human capital really cannot explain that, but the signaling model can. Signaling also is the best way to understand another big fact about modern labor markets, which is that there has been massive credential inflation over the last 80 years. It really is true that the first job that you will get out of college is one that your parents or grandparents could have gotten with much less education. So it used to be the case, most managers in America in 1945 would not have even finished high school. At least barely. There'd be a lot of high school dropouts who would be managers in 1945. Why? Like, how could that be? Because you don't really need to go to school to learn how to manage a business. You need practical experience, learning by doing, right? And of course, also intelligence, which is something that school does very little to increase. So now, what is the big implication of this? It's that, look, school is like a prisoner's dilemma. There's a big negative externality of education. Economists love the idea as a positive externality. Wrong. Big negative externality. The main thing that happens when you get more education is that you look better compared to the competition, but you have to burn up years of your life, years worth of taxpayer resources in order to do it. And then in the end, the workforce is actually not much more skilled. Now again, I don't say that education doesn't improve skill at all, but the share of the return to education that comes from actual improvements in skill, I say, is only about 20%, and I say 80% is signaling, which really does mean, and there's other research saying this, that despite the World Bank, despite the IMF, the best way to go and get a country's GDP up, the best way to start economic growth is not by throwing money at education, right? That is actually reversing cause and effect. The real story is when countries get rich, they spend more on education.
When I defend these ideas, because I think you're correct, I introduce them as a particular case of a more general idea of honest, costly signaling. Mm-hmm. They are incredibly important in biology. There's a book, that I always recommend, Ahmad Zahavi, The Handicap Principle. Then there's in economics or sociology, The Theory of the Leisure Class by Thorstein Veblen. Yep. Then there's Michael Spence started writing about this. So it would be surprising if humans didn't do a lot of signaling in cultural things like education.
Yes. I mean, like, economists' favorite objection is, look, it can't be. There's got to be an easier way to find out who are the good workers and who are the bad workers than having them go to school for 21 years. I say, look, I agree, it seems that way, but here's the problem. Suppose that we had one day where we said everyone in society come in and we're just going to go and have a one-day test of, I'm going to try to teach you European history in one day, and whoever gets the best scores is going to go and get the best jobs. Well, If your entire future depended upon learning the material from one day, even very lazy people would likely go and do it. It's like, okay, fine, it lasts 2 days, it lasts a week, it lasts a month, it lasts a year. It's a war of attrition. And you really can see this in graduate school when so many graduate students finish the coursework and like, I don't want to do the dissertation. I'm so sick of this. It's like, all right, yes, well, you're the people. You leave, and then the other people do finish, and they get the big rewards. If everyone was willing to do 21 years, we would need to do 22 years. And we'd have to keep going on until finally people start giving up. And the other thing, so I like to say that signaling is a special case of statistical discrimination. If you can believe that an auto insurance company might charge higher premia to younger drivers, that is based on statistics. Why don't they go and give you insurance rates based upon your individual driving performance? Well, for a 16-year-old driver, you don't know their driving performance. It's like, I drove for one day, I didn't get in an accident, give me a low insurance rate. It's like, no. That isn't enough time to find out whether you're a bad driver. And so the very fact that you're 16 gives us a lot of information about whether you're a bad driver or not. And yes, if you're driving for 20 years and don't have an accident, yes, we will cut your rate by then. But you are still going to be judged based upon your demographics for many years. And it's the same thing with education. If you get a college degree, then you get judged as like a college graduate for many years. If you're terrible, eventually you can mess up your career. Although in America, usually we'll just try to encourage you to get a different job, and then you're the other person's problem.
Okay, your next two books are incredibly important now in the world in general, in Spain in particular, about immigration and about housing. First one, Open Borders, The Science and Ethics of Immigration, and both are comic books, so they are very easy to read, and that's nice.
A lot of people ask, so why did you do it this way? And the answer is, look, there's a lot of fantastic research that speaks to vital and important questions, but it's too boring, and hardly anybody reads it. So I wanted to go and take the research and also to take a lot of research that people don't immediately think of as being directly connected to the issues I'm writing about and show that it's all part of one big picture. For example, international adoption, what does that have to do with immigration? It's like, well, here's what it has to do. Well, my colleague Garrett Jones has a book about how IQ is extremely important for national success. But as I said, we also have some great work showing that the best way to raise a person's adult IQ permanently is to adopt them from when they are a baby from a third world orphanage and move them to the first world. And say, okay, yes, so that's actually an argument for immigration. This is the best way we know to raise IQ. If IQ is important, then you should want to get people out of horrible poverty where they are both physically and mentally stunted for life. But anyway, so for immigration, there is a very influential paper called $1 Trillion Bills on the Sidewalk by my now colleague Michael Clemens. We just hired him a couple years ago. And this is one that just says, look, it seems like if we let in one low-skilled immigrant from the third world into the United States, his income suddenly will multiply by a factor of 10 or 15. That's amazing. So do you know any other ways of suddenly giving someone a raise that multiplies their income 10 or 15 times? Anything else? If there was something you could do to multiply your income 15 times, would you do it? It's like, what if you had to wear a suit and then you'll make 15 times as much money? Would you do that for 15 times as much money? I would, right? So it's like, how is that possible? It's got to be that productivity is much higher in the first world than in the third world for the same worker. It's not that the workers in the first world are so much better, and how do we know? Because we can bring a Haitian worker in to clean dishes in a restaurant and see suddenly he is actually making 15 times as much money. In basic economics, like, why would that be? Is it charity? Or employers to say, like, I want to go and help you? It's got to be that their productivity is going up that much. Which again, if you say, well, how could that be? Well, it's very easy to see in agriculture. You take a third world farmer, put him on a modern agribusiness, and you can see he now is growing 15 times as much food. Not a big surprise. For manufacturing, it's also easy to see. You go and you take someone doing primitive home production, put them in a modern factory, and again, they have massively more production. The only productivity gain that's hard to understand is for services. Because isn't shining shoes in Madrid the same as shining shoes in Caracas? It's like physically it is, except what is the point of a service? The point of a service is to save time. And if you save the time of a person with a higher wage, you are saving more valuable time and contributing more to the economy. If you save an hour of Bill Gates' time, you are doing more for humanity than you are if you save 1 hour of my time. So that is how service immigration also has higher productivity. So once you understand this, and this is just a basic observable fact, it is just true that if you remove one person, you can get a massive increase in earnings. The only intellectually interesting question, once you appreciate this, is how scalable is this? We can let in one person and there's a massive gain, not just for the worker, but for humanity. We can let in 10, massive gain for the worker and humanity. Let in 1,000, let in 10,000, let in 100,000, let in 1 million. And the question is, all right, but what about 10 million, 50 million, 100 million? Will it work then? And that is what Open Borders focuses on. All of the concerns about the scalability, that there will be some horrible social harm that will be done that will be so great that it will actually outweigh the trillions of dollars of productivity gain. Last October, I actually finally got to go to United Arab Emirates. Anyone here been to UAE? All right, so, es magnifico. You must go. You must go. Right? And what do you see there? You see a country that is 88% foreign-born. 88%. And everything that I am talking about is visible reality there. They have let in an enormous number of immigrants. The immigrants come because they make 5 times as much money there as they would in their home country. And it has turned a barren desert into at least 2 cities of the future, 2 cities from Star Wars, 2 cities that are just unbelievable to look at them. And what's really impressive is, you say, well, they have all this oil. It's like, look, they started off with about 280,000 people in 1971 when UAE became a country. 280,000. Now they have almost 10 million people there. They multiplied the population 34 times. Right? What would have happened if they had not brought in foreign workers? Even if they could still have had their whole oil industry, and every citizen was getting their checks from the government, everyone's getting their share, what would they spend their money on without those immigrants? It would be like a millionaire would have to pay another millionaire to deliver a pizza. Instead, they did the sensible thing, which is saying, look, we're all rich from the oil. Let's bring in workers to do stuff for us so that we can enjoy the money. Right? And that is what happened. And through immigration, they have built this incredible city. And now, part of what's going on is that standard complaints about immigration, the immigration policy of Emirates solves. So it's like, well, what do we do about immigrants going on welfare? Let's see. This is going to be really intellectually difficult to figure out. How about we don't give immigrants welfare? So that is the way the system there basically works. The welfare state, it's a big welfare state for 12% of the population. And for the other 88%, there's basically no welfare state at all. All right, now, in Open Borders, I go over the U.S. numbers and I say, look, even with the welfare state, immigration is still a net positive for U.S. taxpayers for almost all cases, at least a large majority of cases. But again, yes, could we do better? Yes, you could say that you immigrants are not eligible for welfare, or you have to pay $100,000 in taxes before you can start collecting, or you have to wait 10 years or 20 years. There's so many ways of doing it, which are so much more constructive than what we see in especially the European Union, where like Sweden will let immigrants in and say, oh no, they're on welfare and they won't work. It's like, well, whose fault is that? Like, why don't you just change your welfare policies? That would be unequal. It's like, but it's equal to not let them come at all? Yes. It's like that makes no sense. Right? So, and the nerve of countries like Sweden to go and talk about the human rights abuses of workers in Emirates. It's like, they let low-skilled workers come and get a job. You don't do that. It's like, and you're going to complain that they don't get government-provided health insurance? Come on. So the point of that book is to talk about this incredible missed opportunity. I really do try to deal with all the complaints, including complaints that people are not comfortable with. So there is this complaint of third world IQ is very low. They're going to come here and ruin our country with their low IQs. And I said, look, there's some good evidence for that. It's something that should make people worried. People should not dismiss this argument just by saying, like, oh, you're racist if you believe IQ exists. So I try to go over the actual evidence and what the evidence really says, and you can see what I did with it. And then I have the other book on housing regulation. That's one where I especially thought no one will want to hear about this unless I do it as a graphic novel. Right, so there are regular books on housing deregulation, but not to disparage my competition, but they are pretty boring. I have a lot of trouble imagining most human beings reading any other book on housing regulation. And mine, I think, like, I can see a normal person reading the book. I know there are children that like the book, so it's got to be speaking to a wider audience, but I still try to base it on the best scholarship, to be careful, to fact check it, to explain any doubts or reservations that I have about the evidence. But it's another simple story saying that housing is extremely regulated. Right? There's draconian regulation. If you can get a piece of paper from the government saying that you're allowed to build a skyscraper in Madrid, that piece of paper is probably worth $1 billion. It's a piece of paper. How can it be worth more anything? It's like, because you need that paper to do the most economically profitable use of the land that you have here. It's like, well, why don't governments just say yes? The basic answer is most people think it would be a disaster to say yes. They just have a lot of complaints about how terrible it would be. And what I try to do in Build Baby Build is to say, like, first of all, the complaints are just overstated. You are being paranoid. But second of all, the benefits are just greatly understated. People are so quick to go and list all of the negatives of new construction. It's like, oh, there's going to be terrible traffic problems and parking problems and noise. It's like, okay, you're probably right about those three things. But guess what? There is a very easy way to basically get rid of all your traffic, parking, and noise problems. That's just move to the country. Move to a rural area. It's like, yeah, but I don't want to move to a rural area. Yeah, exactly. Why not? Because while rural areas lack the negatives of dense areas, they also lack the positives. They lack the job opportunities, the social opportunities, the shopping opportunities, the cultural opportunities. What you get in big cities is a package of a bunch of positive externalities and a bunch of negative externalities. And what we see is that people give a very high positive value to the package. And yet, contrary to what economics textbooks say, governments do not encourage construction, they discourage construction very strongly. Right, so again, this is one where if I were talking to Austrians, it's like, why do you sit around complaining about textbooks and negative externalities instead of saying, wait, the textbook says that you should definitely not be discouraging housing because it has on-net big positive externalities. So anyway, in the book I go over the evidence on how bad the regulation is, where the regulation is bad, what particular regulations are bad. I'm happy to go into more, but you may have some more questions.
Two more ideas before giving the turn to the public that are associated with you. The first one is the ideological Turing test. Was that an original idea?
Yes, it was. Yeah. I mean, so of course, Alan Turing came up with the Turing test, but I am the originator of the ideological Turing test. The original idea of the Turing test is it's a test of artificial intelligence. So it says, suppose we have two rooms. Inside of one room is a human. Inside the other room is a computer. You don't know which room contains which respondent. And then you're allowed to go and write any question you want and put it under the door. And in one room, the human responds, and the other room, the computer responds. And then the computer passes the ideological Turing test if you cannot tell the difference between the human and the computer. All right, so that is the standard. Now, this idea, so I knew about this idea for quite a while, but then people often talk about being able to steelman or being able to explain another person's ideas, and especially there was a speech a talk that Paul Krugman gave, where he said, look, the difference between a liberal and a conservative economist is that the conservative economist cannot explain the liberal economist's viewpoint, whereas the liberal economist can explain both his own viewpoint and the viewpoint that he disagrees with, namely the conservative economist. Right now, my immediate reaction to this is you already just failed your own test because there's almost no economists who call themselves conservative economists. There are free market economists, there are libertarian economists. The number of self-identified conservative economists in academia is almost none. So you don't even know the name of the view that you disagree with, much less its content, right? And then also my reaction is that's ridiculous, because to be an economics professor, you've got to get a PhD, generally from a highly ranked school. Since all highly ranked schools in the United States are dominated by left-wing economists, or left-leaning economists, as part of the curriculum, just to get through it, we must learn the mainstream view. Therefore, Paul is wrong. All right, so anyway, this is my first reaction. But then my reaction to my own reaction was, that's what you say, Bryan. Paul Krugman says, liberal economists know better, are great at explaining their opponent's views. Like, no, libertarian economists are great at explaining their opponent's views. Well, yeah, that's kind of lame just to go and say that. And I say, what? And that was where I got the idea of the test. What if we were to do an ideological Turing test where we have me behind one door, Paul Krugman behind the other door, and then we have fans of Paul and fans of me go and put questions under both doors, and we just see whether they are able to tell from the answers who is behind each door. Now, and I said, look, the beauty of this is of the ideological Turing test is that it's a test. It's not just, no, you're the one that doesn't understand me. It's one where it is double blind. We have an objective standard. It's one where the people that like Krugman could fail their own test, and they could actually say, they wouldn't want to, but they go and score it, and by their own scoring, I could actually beat Paul in an unambiguous way that even he could not honestly dispute. So this is an idea I still haven't gotten Paul to do it with me, right? If Paul said yes, I would go anywhere on earth to do this game with Paul. I have 90% chance I can beat Paul. I'm almost sure I can, right? But there are a number of people that have done ideas like this, and actually I was just refereeing a paper where a psychologist went and did ideological Turing tests for controversial ideas in Britain. And so, anyway, so like, it's an idea that I hope people do more of. I don't even care. It's not. I'd much rather that you do it and then don't give me any credit than that you don't do it and give me credit.
And last thing, you love to bet.
Yes.
A bet is a tax on bullshit.
Yes, a bet is.
And you have Robin Hanson there with prediction markets.
Yes.
And what's your track record on bets? Have you lost any?
I have yet to lose a public bet. I am 23 for 23. All right, so I may lose something, but I do have a very good track record on this. And by the way, so this is one of my biggest disagreements with Tyler Cowen, where he still says, he has lost one public bet to me, I think. But he still says, it proves nothing, it doesn't prove a damn thing. And it's like, look, you know what? You're right. One bet only proves a little bit. You could get lucky on one bet. But a track record of 23 for 23 does show a lot. It shows that it's not just that I am saying I am great, I've been right. Almost everybody says that. How many people have a friend who reads the newspaper and every morning they look at the headlines like, once again I am proven correct by all the headlines? Just like, how can that be when people that disagree with you are also saying the very same thing every single day? Right? This is a case of what political psychologist Philip Tetlock calls self-scoring, where you just say, once again I'm great. Like, you didn't say what would count as you being not great. So how do we know, really? But anyway, so it was Robin Hanson who actually got me interested in this. But once he got me interested in betting, I really did start thinking about this as, again, it's something where there are so many arguments that go nowhere, where each person just says, well, like, we have to agree to disagree. It's like, no, there's something better than agreeing to disagree. Let's agree to bet. Let's go and say, look, if I'm right, this is what will happen. If you're right, this is what will happen. Let us carefully state the conditions under which I am considered right, the conditions under which you are considered right, and we put some money down, and then we just see, right? And it's like, well, will that decisively resolve it? Like, no. But unlike continuing the debate for another 1,000 hours, it makes progress, and it makes progress in a credible way that you can communicate. You guys have heard of the Julian Simon Paul Ehrlich bet? There is a book called The Bet about this bet, where Paul Ehrlich for decades was predicting mass famine in first world countries, and Julian Simon is saying that's ridiculous, right? But there's still the problem of, well, Paul Ehrlich said a lot of things, and so how do we know if he's really right or wrong? And this was one where Julian Simon said, I will bet you that any basket of commodities that you choose will, over a reasonably long period, say 10 years, define 10 years, fall in price. And Paul Ehrlich went and picked one and got crushed. There's been part of the bet of the book. The bet went and said, well, what if we change the time horizon? And Julian Simon would not have won over every single time horizon, but there's not a single time horizon where Paul Ehrlich would have been right about mass famine in first world countries or anything close. By the way, there's also an incredible video of Paul Ehrlich where they're asking him, well, but weren't you just wrong? And he says, well, you have to understand, I'm a biologist. We think in terms of millions of years. Then why do you say there would be a famine by 1985? It's like, yeah, well, no one would care about it if I said it'd be millions of years, so I had to lie. He didn't say that part, but that was obviously his answer is, because I'm a liar, that's why, and I'm just saying things that I'm noble lies maybe. I'm just trying to terrify people into taking drastic action, because if I gave a reasonable prediction, no one would care. So anyway, some of the great things about bets. First of all, you find out whether there is a disagreement at all. There are many times where a bet has been proposed and we talk and then we realize we don't even disagree. Like, for example, there was someone on Twitter who said, look, Europe is going to be in civil war due to immigration in 10 years. Like, oh, right. How about we define civil war as like more than 10,000 combat fatalities? And then he said, no. There were three Europeans were murdered by an immigrant just last month. That counts as civil war. It's like, okay, so you just use the phrase civil war in a totally non-standard way. And yeah, I agree that there's some people murdered by immigrants in Europe. You might not want to use this hyperbolic language, but anyway, we don't really disagree. And then secondly, you also get a degree of confidence. So people often say it's absolutely certain. Well, if it's absolutely certain, you'll bet your house against my penny. Do you want to bet your house against my penny? Like, no. How about even odds? Yeah, that doesn't sound like you're very confident at all, does it? Some years ago, John Podhoretz, son of Norman Podhoretz, he said, the nuclear deal with Iran effectively ensures they will be a nuclear power in 10 years. And I said, okay, effectively ensures. What does that mean? Is that 10 to 1 odds? What is that? And he said, I'll bet you at even odds. And I'm like, yeah. Well, here's the thing. You claim certainty, and I claimed agnosticism, so you should have to give me odds. The only thing I know is John Podhoretz does not know when Iran will be a nuclear power. He doesn't know much of anything. Yes?
Has Philip Tetlock contacted you to be a super forecaster?
So I think there's actually an open casting call for anyone, and I think when he was doing the original ones, I was preoccupied being a dad, so I don't think I even heard about it until it was too late. I have gotten to go to Phil's apartment twice and hang out with him. He's a super cool guy and very mild-mannered. I'd love to have you invite him, but he actually hardly ever travels, so he's very locationally tied, unfortunately. But yeah, so if you don't know the name of Philip Tetlock, you must. So he has two fantastic popular books. One is Super Forecasting, and the other one is Expert Political Judgment. And then just to read his entire lifetime work, he has done incredible papers on everything from counterfactual history to the psychology of the sacred and much more.